At 72, Elaine prided herself on keeping up with the times. She used a smartphone to text her grandchildren, paid her bills online, and even ordered groceries with a few taps on her tablet. But one afternoon at her local library, she attended a workshop led by a privacy expert who startled her with a simple truth. You are being watched in more places than you realize, and for seniors, the risks are even greater. The words stuck in her mind. Being watched? Elaine had nothing to hide. Still, she listened carefully as the expert outlined 5 surprising places where surveillance crept into daily life, places where older adults rarely suspected it. The more Elaine learned, the more she realized this wasn't about secrets, but about dignity, safety, and control. The first place, the expert explained, was inside the very home she trusted as her sanctuary. Smart devices, voice assistants, televisions, even security cameras collected more data than most owners knew. A smart TV could track what programs she watched at what time and how often she muted the volume. Voice assistants sometimes kept recordings of conversations triggered by accident. For Elaine, who had considered buying a smart speaker to play her favorite old jazz records, this was unsettling. The expert warned, convenience comes at a price. If you invite devices into your home, understand that they may be listening. Elaine thought of her friend Gloria, who once mentioned how her phone seemed to advertise cat food right after she had spoken aloud about her neighbor's new kitten. At the time, Elaine had laughed. Now she wondered if it was coincidence at all. The second place was in the neighborhood itself. Cameras dotted street corners, stores, buses, and even doorbells. At first, Elaine saw them as protection, keeping streets safe. But the expert explained that footage often ended up in databases far larger than local law enforcement. Private companies stored and analyzed it, sometimes using facial recognition software. The result was a digital trail of movements: which shops she visited, what time she left her house, who she met. For criminals, this data could be exploited to guess her routines. For marketers, it meant more targeted ads. Elaine pictured herself walking to her favorite bakery every Thursday, unaware that her pattern was quietly recorded. The third place startled her most: healthcare. As an older adult, Elaine relied heavily on her clinic and pharmacy. She assumed her medical information was locked tight. Yet the expert explained that health data, especially from wearable devices and online patient portals, was increasingly shared with third parties. Insurance companies analyzed it to predict costs. Pharmaceutical companies tracked prescription refills. Even apps that promised to monitor blood pressure or sleep cycles often sold the information behind the scenes. Elaine realized her most personal details, her aches, her heart rhythms, her late-night restlessness, might not belong solely to her. The fourth place was where she least expected it: her car. Modern vehicles, especially newer models, acted like rolling computers. They tracked speed, braking habits, GPS locations, and even whether the seatbelt was fastened. Some transmitted this data back to manufacturers, who shared it with insurers or advertisers. For seniors, who often drove only short distances to visit family or run errands, the thought of their every trip being logged was unnerving. Elaine imagined her weekly route to church preserved in some invisible file. She had always thought of her car as freedom. Now she learned it could also be surveillance. The fifth place was the digital world where Elaine felt proudest: her smartphone and social media. She loved scrolling through photos her grandchildren posted and occasionally sharing her own. But the expert warned her that apps tracked far more than photos. They mapped contacts, locations, and browsing habits. Even simple games or flashlight apps sometimes carried hidden trackers. For seniors, scams often began with this kind of data harvesting. Strangers learned birthdays, habits, or vulnerabilities, then used them to trick or exploit. Elaine remembered the suspicious email she once received claiming to be from her bank. She had deleted it without clicking, but now she understood how such attempts were fueled by data she never knowingly gave away. The room at the library grew quiet as the expert finished. Many seniors looked uneasy, some whispering to one another. Elaine felt both wary and empowered. It wasn't that she lived in constant danger, but she realized how easily privacy slipped away when unnoticed. She raised her hand. "So what do we do?" she asked. The expert smiled. "Awareness is the first defense. Limit smart devices if you don't need them. Read permissions before installing apps. Turn off features you don't use. Be mindful of what you share online. And remember, privacy is not about hiding, it's about control. You deserve to choose who knows your story. That night, Elaine sat at her kitchen table and made small changes. She checked her phone settings, revoking permissions for apps she rarely used. She turned off her location services except when necessary. She decided against buying a smart speaker, realizing she preferred the quiet of her own thoughts anyway. At her next doctor's visit, she asked pointed questions about how her health data was stored and who had access. The nurse seemed surprised but answered honestly, and Elaine felt stronger for asking. Over the weeks, Elaine shared what she learned with friends at her senior center. Some were shocked to hear about car tracking, others about medical data. One man laughed nervously and said, "So even my TV is spying on me?" Elaine nodded gently. "It's not about fear," she explained. "It's about knowing." Together, they began swapping tips, using cash for small purchases, adjusting phone settings, reading the fine print on new devices. Slowly, they reclaimed a measure of privacy. The surveillance didn't vanish, of course. Cameras still watched the streets, companies still mined data, but Elaine felt less like a passive subject and more like an active participant. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the game being played. For her, that was wisdom, the wisdom of elders who had lived through many changes and learned the value of guarding what truly mattered. She often thought back to the 5 places the expert had revealed: the home, the neighborhood, healthcare, the car, and the phone. Each one had seemed ordinary, safe, even invisible, yet within each, hidden eyes had been watching. Knowing this didn't make her fearful, it made her mindful. Aging, she realized, wasn't about surrendering control, but about protecting it in new ways. And so each morning as she turned on her tablet to read the news, she did so with awareness, her choices deliberate, her privacy intact. Word count, 11-5.